Removing the rear suspension was interesting, to say the least. Some parts came apart fairly easily, while others had to be cut apart. The 64 C10 rear suspension is by coil springs setting on top of pivoting trailing arms. In this video, I will discuss the trailing arms very little, even though I realize they are a major component of the rear suspension. Trailing arm refurbishing will be discussed in a later video. The rear coil springs set in cup-shaped retainers, with a bolt anchoring the spring to the cup and trailing arm, as well as to the frame on the top. The C10's attachment points were badly rusted, and I was unable to loosen the retaining bolts. I soaked the area with penetrating oil for several days. Still stubborn, I eventually broke off the retaining bolts. I ended up cutting the coil springs out with a cutting disc. The majority of the bolts on both sides of the truck was rusted inside the retaining arms and had to be removed. More on this later. The panhard bar was removed. After removing the trailing arm pivot bolts, the rotted bushings were removed by drilling out the rubber and then pressing them out. This picture shows the spring retainer cup, with the bolt still rusted inside the retaining arm. Eventually, the trailing arms containing the rear differential were removed from the frame. Here are the remains of the spring retainer bolts after removal from the trailing arms. The rear lower shock absorber mounts were also removed. The parts were blasted and painted for reuse. This photo shows the difference between the front springs on the left and the rear springs on the right. The springs arrived painted black, but I painted them apple red for more eye appeal. The next few photos show the 3-inch lowering springs installed along with a new rear axle bump stop. The fasteners were torqued to specs to complete the spring installation. New rear shocks with less travel were installed. The lower shock mounts needed a bit of persuasion to get the shocks to fit into the mount. I made a tool to slightly spread the mount out of ready rod, nuts, and washers. I used the length of the original panhard bar to set the initial length of the new bar. After painting, the panhard bar was installed. Final adjustments were made later with the truck back on the ground.